Good morning. This is Omni View, episode 96, Balanced News Perspectives. Today is June 28th, 2026. We'll cover what happened, how different viewpoints frame it, so you can decide for yourself. The week's biggest developments pulled together, what actually moved, why it matters, and what to watch next. Former Federal Reserve Chair Alan Greenspan's approach to managing market expectations during crises continues to shape discussions about central bank communication. Outlets across the spectrum note his skill at steering policy through the 1987 crash and later expansions. CNBC frames his measured public statements as a deliberate tool that preserved flexibility for policymakers across multiple administrations. The Guardian emphasizes his influence stretching from the Reagan era through George W. Bush, setting lasting precedents for how the institution speaks to markets. Treasury officials and former colleagues argue his steady presence demonstrated the value of experienced, nonpartisan leadership at the Fed. Civil liberties and transparency advocates counter that his reluctance to speak plainly reduced accountability over decisions affecting wages and savings. Even supporters concede that later events tested the limits of the hands-off regulatory stance he favored. What evidence shows whether his statements moved markets more than formal announcements? Shifting now to diplomacy in the Middle East, Israel and Lebanon are scheduled for a new round of U.S.-hosted talks aimed at addressing security and reconstruction after years of conflict. Israeli officials view the discussions as a chance to secure lasting guarantees, while Lebanese representatives see them as a way to ease military pressure and begin repairing infrastructure. U.S. diplomats emphasize procedural continuity with past agreements that produce temporary ceasefires. Iranian statements highlight the need for parallel economic measures to sustain any deal. Both sides accept that external mediation has previously paused hostilities, yet they differ on whether the current round can establish durable borders. The question worth considering is what concrete security arrangements are actually on the table and which outside actors retain veto power. Meanwhile, the Senate passed a non-binding resolution addressing prolonged military engagement without fresh legislative approval. Supporters in both parties emphasize restoring checks on executive decisions that could expand into broader conflict. Critics within the administration view the step as an unnecessary constraint that weakens leverage during active talks. Treasury and defense officials maintain that sustained pressure through sanctions and military posture has brought Iran to the table. Congressional backers of the resolution counter that unchecked executive latitude has historically led to mission creep. Both sides agree the vote carries no binding legal force, but they differ on whether it strengthens or complicates diplomatic efforts. How have past Senate votes on war powers affected actual military planning? Next, Venezuela faces recovery after a major earthquake that authorities have described as a national emergency. Neighboring governments and aid organizations frame their offers of help as standard humanitarian practice. Some regional analysts point to political isolation that has limited Venezuela's access to routine disaster cooperation channels. The strongest argument for swift international aid rests on the narrow time windows for live rescues after collapsed structures. Officials wary of external involvement stress that aid deliveries must remain under national coordination to avoid parallel command structures. Both sides agree the immediate priority is locating survivors, yet they differ on whether long-standing political disputes will affect the speed of assistance. How do countries decide which rescue teams to accept first when multiple offers arrive? Turning to aviation, Heathrow expects a fall in passengers and profits this year linked to regional conflict. Airport operators emphasize adjusting forecasts and controlling costs to maintain long-term viability when external events reduce demand. Travel industry voices highlight risks to jobs and connectivity that support regional economies. Regulators focus on ensuring expansion plans remain financially sound, even under reduced traffic scenarios. Both sides agree external events can shift travel volumes quickly, but they differ on how quickly recovery might occur. What contingency measures protect passenger rights during sudden schedule changes? Finally, recent U.S. strikes in the Strait of Hormuz occurred during scheduled talks and a ceasefire pause. U.S. officials framed the strikes as a necessary response to protect shipping lanes and enforce ceasefire terms. Iranian statements emphasize that the U.S. action itself broke the agreed pause in fighting and undermined diplomatic efforts. Treasury and defense officials stressed the need to maintain credibility in negotiations. Iranian representatives highlight risks to regional stability from renewed escalation. Both sides agree the incident took place during talks, yet they differ on whether the initial ship attack justified resuming strikes. Which international bodies are monitoring compliance with the ceasefire? England's wives and girlfriends, along with their children, gathered in rainy New York to support the national team after its World Cup victory over Panama. Players joined family members in the stands once the match ended, with some displaying handmade signs. Separate coverage noted that American television analysts dismantled the Three Lions performance despite the win. 3 specific England players received criticism described as labeling them ignorant and arrogant. The Daily Mail reported both the family celebration and the transatlantic broadcast reaction in detail. Observers noted the contrast between the on-field result and the tone of the U.S. commentary. The stories together illustrate differing national receptions of the same sporting outcome. France recorded around 1,000 excess deaths during a recent heat wave, according to France 24. The figure reflects measured increases above typical mortality rates for the period. Officials have linked the deaths to sustained high temperatures across multiple regions. Public health responses included expanded cooling centers and warnings targeted at vulnerable groups. Neighboring countries reported parallel spikes, though exact comparisons remain under review. The data underscore ongoing challenges in adapting infrastructure and services to extreme heat events. France 24 placed the total in the context of broader European summer conditions. Clarkson's Farm star Caleb Cooper shared initial plans for his summer wedding to Taya Wilkinson. The couple discussed arrangements with Alex Doyle and revealed a disagreement over one central element of the ceremony. Cooper described the event as a return to personal priorities after the demands of filming. Details released so far focus on venue choices and guest logistics rather than larger public elements. The Mail Online account noted Cooper's preference for a low-key approach in contrast to some expectations. Preparations continue amid his ongoing television schedule. The coverage positions the wedding as a personal milestone separate from the series' farming narrative. A group of men identified as passport bros have discussed rejecting what they describe as overbearing Western women in favor of relationships in Asia. The Daily Mail profile presented their stated preference for traditional partnerships and relocation. Participants cited cultural differences and lifestyle changes as primary motivations. The trend reportedly involves online communities sharing relocation experiences and advice. Critics in the same reporting frame the movement as a response to shifting social dynamics in Western countries. The article included individual accounts of moves to specific Asian nations. No aggregate numbers on participation appear in the coverage. Rising costs of insuring against climate-related risks are projected to produce wider effects on the UK economy. The Guardian analysis by Heather Stewart links higher premiums to increased claims from flooding and extreme weather. Businesses and households face elevated expenses that may reduce spending in other sectors. Insurers have adjusted models to reflect greater frequency of events previously considered rare. Regulators are examining whether current capital requirements remain adequate under revised projections. The piece notes potential feedback loops between insurance availability and property values in exposed areas. Stewart situates the trend within longer-term fiscal pressures on both public and private balance sheets. To understand the week's diplomatic and military developments, It helps to separate what both sides accept from where their interpretations diverge. All parties acknowledge that external mediation has produced temporary pauses in fighting before, and that reconstruction costs and sanctions create real incentives. The split arises over whether renewed strikes strengthen negotiating leverage or simply restart a cycle that previous pauses could not break. Next time you hear claims that one side's action alone derailed talks, ask which prior agreements already set the timeline and which actors hold practical veto power over follow-through. Before we go, watch for any concrete security proposals that may surface in the next round of Israel-Lebanon discussions. That wraps up today's Omni View. Remember, the best informed people read more than one perspective. If this show helps you do that, share it with someone who values fair coverage. See you tomorrow. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets. Each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Models and Agents for Beginners. Artificial Intelligence Explained Simply for Beginners and Curious Teens. Find every show free at naranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.